At 10:47 p.m. on December 11th, 1942, Lieutenant Lester Gamble throttled PT-37 through black waters off Guadalcanal, watching 11 Japanese destroyers move south. 28 years old, 5 months in the Solomons, 0 destroyers sunk. The lead ship was Teruzuki, a 440-foot Ekizuki-class destroyer carrying 8 rapid-fire guns and the newest fire control system in the Japanese fleet. Gamble's boat was 77 ft of plywood and mahogany, 40 tons fully loaded, 3 Packard engines that screamed like banshees when you pushed them past 30 knots, 4 Mark 8 torpedoes, 2 twin 50-caliber machine guns against a destroyer 6 times longer with armor plating and crew of 350. The math was simple. PT boats died fast in the Solomons. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 3 had lost 4 boats in 2 months, 18 men killed, another 23 wounded. The Japanese called PT boats mosquitoes, annoying, easy to swat. American sailors had a different word for going against destroyers in wooden boats, suicide. But the Tokyo Express was running again. Admiral Tanaka. The Japanese called him the master of night operations. American forces called him Tenacious Tanaka. 6 months of supply runs to Guadalcanal. 6 months of slipping past American air patrols. 6 months of keeping Japanese troops alive on an island that should have fallen in August. Tonight was his 4th drum run in December. 11 destroyers carrying watertight drums filled with rice and ammunition. They would drop the drums offshore, let the current carry supplies to Japanese soldiers starving in the jungle, then disappear before dawn, brought American dive bombers. Teruzuki led the formation. Tanaka had chosen her as his flagship for good reason. 3 weeks earlier, she had crippled USS Sterett, helped sink USS Laffey and USS Monson in the same night battle, launched torpedoes at the battleship South Dakota, all without taking a scratch. Her Type 98 dual-purpose guns could elevate to any angle, fire at aircraft, fire at surface targets, reload at any elevation. Most Japanese destroyers needed minutes to switch between roles. Teruzuki could do it instantly. Behind PT-37, 2 more boats carved white wakes through the darkness. PT-40 under Lieutenant Stilly Taylor. PT-48 under Lieutenant Bill Kreiner. 3 wooden boats, 12 torpedoes total, against a formation that had already proven it could destroy American warships built of steel. Gamble checked his crew, 11 men. The youngest was 19, the oldest was 32. Motor machinists' mates who kept the Packard engines running in tropical heat that turned engine rooms into ovens. Torpedo men who maintained weapons that often malfunctioned. Gunners who manned 50s that jammed from salt spray. All volunteers, all knowing that wooden boats burned fast when hit by destroyer shells. The Japanese formation was moving at 12 knots, slow, vulnerable, but destroyers at slow speed were still faster than PT boats making evasive turns, and Teruzuki's fire control could track targets in complete darkness using sound ranging and muzzle flash detection. The system had been tested 3 weeks ago against American ships. It worked. Intelligence had reported the convoy 2 hours earlier. Marine dive bombers attacked at dusk. 14 SBDs, not one hit. Tanaka kept formation, kept moving, dropped his drums off Cape Esperance, right on schedule. Now he was withdrawing, 3 miles off Savo Island. Heading north to safety, home by dawn. If you want to see how Gamble's attack turned out, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from World War II. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Gamble. Gamble watched Teruzuki through binoculars. Range 2300 Walchurwind. The destroyer's profile was darker than the night sky behind it. He throttled back to idle. PT-40 and PT-48 did the same. 3 boats drifting in darkness. Tanaka's lookouts were scanning for the phosphorescent wakes that betrayed PT boats at high speed. Find nothing. See nothing. Gamble's hand moved to the throttle. 4 Mark 8 torpedoes loaded. Each weighed $3,000 lb. Each carried 600 lib of Torpex explosive, enough to break a destroyer's keel if they ran straight. If they didn't sink, if the firing mechanism worked. The Mark 8 had a 60% failure rate in combat. 60%. More than half his torpedoes would probably die in the water or pass underneath the target without detonating. Teruzuki was 1,500 YD away now. Gamble needed to close to under 1,000 yards for a reliable shot. Under 1,000 yards within range of every gun on that destroyer. One searchlight would turn PT-37 into a burning coffin in seconds. Gamble pushed the throttles forward. Not full speed, just enough. The Packard engines rumbled to life. PT-37 moved toward the Japanese formation at 18 knots. Behind him, PT-40 and PT-48 matched his speed. 3 boats in line, torpedoes armed, firing solutions calculated in the heads of men who had done this before and survived. The water was calm, no moon, cloud cover blocked the stars, perfect conditions for torpedo attack, terrible conditions for seeing what you were shooting at. Gamble's torpedo men were tracking Teruzuki by silhouette, estimating speed, estimating range. Every calculation done by eye and experience because PT boats had no radar, no sonar, no fire control systems, just men with binoculars and a stopwatch. Vuelo the 200 wala vertales, 1100 walahulas. The destroyer's profile grew larger. Gamble could make out details now. The forward gun turrets, the bridge superstructure, the main mast. Teruzuki was third in the Japanese column. Arashi led. Naganami was second. Behind Teruzuki came 8 more destroyers loaded with empty supply drums. The formation was strung out. 300 YD between each ship. Standard withdrawal pattern. Makes sense for avoiding. Submarines. Terrible for mutual fire support. If one ship got hit, the others would need minutes to respond. Minutes PT boats could use to escape. 1000 YD range for attack. Gamble checked the angles. PT-37's torpedoes were mounted in fixed tubes, angled 15 degrees outward from the centerline. You didn't aim torpedoes from a PT boat. You aimed the entire boat. Point the bow at where the target would be in 60 seconds. Fire. Pray the torpedoes ran straight. The Mark 8 torpedo traveled at 36 knots. Decent speed. The problem was depth control. The weapon was supposed to run at 10 FT below the surface. Actually, it ran anywhere from 6 FT to 20 FT depending on water temperature and how recently the gyroscope had been serviced. Too shallow and it broached, left a phosphorescent wake that alerted the target. Too deep and it passed underneath without hitting. Gamble made his decision. He turned PT-37 30 degrees to port, lined up his attack angle. His thumb found the firing button for tubes 1 and 2. The compressed air system was charged. Ready. He watched Teruzuki cross his bow angle, watched the destroyer's profile align with where his torpedoes would be in 63 seconds if everything went right. He pressed the button. Twin blasts of compressed air. 2 dull thumps as 3000 lb torpedoes hit the water. PT-37 lurched slightly as 12,000 lb left the boat in 2 seconds. The torpedoes vanished into darkness. No phosphorescent wake. Good. Depth control. Maybe. Gamble didn't wait to see if they hit. He fired tubes 3 and 4. 2 more blasts. 2 more torpedoes in the water. Then he spun the wheel hard to starboard, shoved the throttles to maximum. PT-37's engine screamed 41 knots. The boat lifted onto plane. Behind him, PT-40 and PT-48 were firing their torpedoes. 12 weapons in the water, closing on 3 different targets in the Japanese column. The Japanese had not reacted. No searchlights, no gun flashes, no alarm. Tanaka's lookouts had missed the attack. The torpedoes were running silent, invisible. 60 seconds to impact, Gamble counted in his head. 40 seconds, 30 seconds, 20 seconds. PT-37 was at full speed now, headed east toward Guadalcanal, putting distance between his boat and whatever was about to happen. His crew was silent, watching, waiting. 10 seconds, 5 seconds, impact, nothing. 2 seconds later, a massive detonation lit up the night. A column of water shot 200 feet into the air behind Teruzuki's main mast. The explosion was so bright, Gamble could see individual Japanese sailors on deck. The destroyer's stern lifted, twisted. The entire aft section erupted in orange flame as ruptured fuel tanks ignited. Teruzuki's forward guns opened fire, not at the PT boats, at empty ocean. The fire control system had been knocked offline by the blast. The guns were firing blind. Searchlights swept the water in random patterns. One beam passed 50 E. Yards ahead of PT-37, close enough that Gamble could feel his heart stop. The beam kept moving. Missed them. A second destroyer in the Japanese column opened fire. Then a third. Star shells burst overhead. Parachute flares that turned night into day. Gamble pushed the throttles past their stops. The Packards were redlining. The boat was shaking so hard his teeth rattled. Behind them, Teruzuki was burning stem to stern. the flagship of Rear Admiral Tanaka, hit by a weapon launched from a boat made of wood. But burning wasn't sinking, and on the bridge of the crippled destroyer, someone was about to make a decision that would determine whether 3 PT boats escaped or died in the next 5 minutes. At 10:59 p.m., Admiral Tanaka was on Teruzuki's bridge when the torpedo hit. The explosion threw him across the compartment. His head struck a metal stanchion. He went down unconscious, blood from a gash on his forehead. His staff officers scrambled to reach him in darkness, lit only by flames from the aft section. The torpedo had struck the port side aft below the main mast. The blast shattered the aft engine room, smashed the port propeller shaft, destroyed the rudder, ruptured fuel tanks that fed 3 compound water tube boilers. Oil ignited instantly, spread across the water around the stern, turned the ocean into a lake of fire. Teruzuki was dead in the water. No propulsion, no steering, just a 440 FT target burning in the middle of Iron Bottom Sound. The crew was already responding. Damage control teams rushed aft with fire hoses. The chief engineer was trying to assess how bad the flooding was, how long they had before the magazines went up. On deck, sailors dragged Tanaka toward the starboard side. The destroyer Naganami was already maneuvering alongside, close enough to transfer personnel. Dangerous in darkness with a crippled ship that could explode at any moment.
But Tanaka was the admiral, the commander of Destroyer Squadron 2. 6 months of successful supply runs, the man who had kept the Tokyo Express running when everyone said it was impossible. He could not be allowed to die on a burning destroyer. At 11:03, the transfer began. Sailors lifted Tanaka's unconscious body across the gap between the 2 ships. Naganami's crew pulled him aboard. 56 other personnel followed. Staff officers, communications specialists, the men needed to command a destroyer squadron. Within 3 minutes, Tanaka was on Naganami's bridge, still unconscious. A Navy surgeon was checking his pupils, his pulse, looking for signs of skull fracture or brain hemorrhage. Behind them, Teruzuki continued to burn. The fire was spreading forward. Ammunition for the 25mm guns started cooking off. Small explosions that sent tracers in random directions. The aft gun turrets were silent, too close to the flames, too hot to man. The forward turrets were still.
Operational, but had nothing to shoot at. The PT boats had vanished. Gamble was 3 miles east by then. PT-37's engines were still screaming at maximum power. The boat was leaving a phosphorescent wake 100 yards long, visible from miles away in darkness. But the Japanese searchlights were focused on the burning Teruzuki, not on empty ocean to the east. The destroyers in Tanaka's formation were circling their crippled flagship, trying to provide fire support, trying to position for rescue operations, not pursuing PT boats. PT-40 and PT-48 were behind Gamble. Both boats intact, all torpedoes expended, all crews accounted for. They had gotten lucky, incredibly lucky. Destroyers killed PT boats with single salvos. Tonight, they had launched 12 torpedoes at a formation of 11 destroyers and escaped without a scratch. But escape wasn't victory. Teruzuki was burning, not sinking. The destroyer's hull was intact below the waterline. The forward 2/3 of the ship was undamaged. If the crew could control the fires, the ship might survive, might be towed back to Truk or Rabaul, might return to service after repairs. Burning a destroyer was good. Sinking a destroyer was better. 4 miles north, 2 more PT boats were racing south. PT-44 under Lieutenant Frank Freeland, PT-110 under Lieutenant Charlie Tilden. They had been patrolling the northern approach to Savo Island when they heard the explosion, saw the flames. Now they were heading toward the sound of battle with 8 fresh torpedoes. Freeland had heard Gamble's attack on the radio, knew the Japanese formation was disrupted, knew at least 1 destroyer was crippled. This was the moment PT boat doctrine called for. First attack creates chaos. Second attack exploits it. Hit them while they're trying to save their wounded ship. Hit them while their attention is divided. Hit them before they can reorganize. At 11:17 p.m., Freeland spotted the Japanese formation. 7 destroyers were circling Teruzuki. 2 more were moving slowly south, probably heading back to pick up survivors from barges that had been cut loose during the attack. 1 destroyer was stopped dead in the water. Arashi bow to bow with Teruzuki, fighting the fires from the forward side while Naganami worked from starboard. The crippled destroyer was lit up like a beacon. Orange flames climbing 100 ft into the night, smoke visible for miles. Every Japanese sailor in the formation was watching their flagship burn. Nobody was watching for a second PT boat attack from the north. Freeland armed his torpedoes and pushed his throttles forward. This was going to be easier than the first attack, or a lot more dangerous, because somewhere in that formation of destroyers, a very angry Japanese admiral was about to wake up. Freeland closed on the Japanese formation from the north, PT-44 and PT-110 running parallel at 25 knots, range 2,000 walor-pilid. The burning Teruzuki was lighting up the entire area. Freeland could see individual destroyers, could count their gun turrets, could watch Japanese sailors running across decks with fire hoses and damage control equipment. Arashi was still bow to bow with Teruzuki, pumping water onto the flames. The fire was concentrated in the aft third of the destroyer. The forward sections were dark, undamaged. If the Japanese could control the fire in the next 30 minutes, they might save the ship. Freeland was about to make sure they didn't get 30 minutes. He selected his target, not Teruzuki. The crippled destroyer was already dying. He aimed at Naganami, the ship that had taken Tanaka aboard, the new flagship of Destroyer Squadron 2. Sink that, and the entire Japanese command structure would be disrupted. Force them to transfer the admiral again. Buy more time for American forces to respond. At 1,400 YD, Freeland fired 2 torpedoes. PT-110 fired 2 more at a different destroyer in the formation, 4 weapons in the water. The PT boats turned hard and accelerated, 40 knots, racing back toward the darkness to the north. Behind them, Japanese lookouts finally spotted the phosphorescent wakes. Searchlights snapped on, found PT-44 in the beam, held it. Naganami's forward guns opened fire, 5-inch shells, high explosive. The first salvo landed 100 yards short. Geysers of water erupted around PT-44. Freeland was already zigzagging, maximum throttle. The E boat was jumping from wave to wave at 41 knots. A second salvo landed closer, 50 yards. Close enough that shrapnel rattled against the wooden hull. Close enough that Freeland could hear the shells whistling overhead. The torpedoes missed. All 4. 2 ran deep, passed under Naganami without detonating. 1 veered left, hit nothing. The 4th surfaced halfway to target, broached, left a white wake that betrayed its position. A Japanese destroyer spotted it, turned to comb the track. The torpedo passed harmlessly down the starboard side. Freeland and Tilden kept running north. Shells were falling around them for 3 more minutes. Then the range opened. The Japanese guns fell silent. PT-44 and PT-110 disappeared into darkness with empty torpedo tubes and crews that were still breathing. The second attack had failed, but it had accomplished something. It had forced the Japanese destroyers to stop their rescue operations, forced them to defend themselves, given Teruzuki's fire 10 more minutes to spread. At 11:42 p.m., Commander Orita stood on Teruzuki's bridge. He was the ship's captain. Tanaka was unconscious on another destroyer. The decision was his now. Stay and fight the fire or abandon ship before it was too late. The damage reports were bad. The aft engine room was completely flooded. The port propeller shaft had broken off. Pieces of it had punched holes in the hull. Water was coming in faster than the pumps could handle. The fire had spread to the aft magazines. Small arms ammunition was cooking off constantly now. Soon the fire would reach the depth charges. 72 Type 95 depth charges, each packed with 300 lb of explosive. If those went up, the entire aft section of the ship would disintegrate. Orita made his decision. He ordered the scuttling valves opened. Kingston valves in the machinery spaces. Let the ocean in. Controlled flooding. Better to sink the ship on his terms than wait for the depth charges to turn it into shrapnel. At least this way the crew could evacuate safely, get everyone off before the end came. Sailors began abandoning ship. Some transferred to Arashi and Naganami. Others launched boats headed for Guadalcanal 3 mi south. Better to be captured by Americans than burned alive on a destroyer that was becoming a floating bomb. 197 men transferred to other destroyers. 156 started rowing for Guadalcanal. 9 men were already dead, killed in the initial torpedo blast, or trapped in flooded compartments. By midnight, Teruzuki was deserted. The fires were burning unchecked now. No crew to fight them, no water pumps running, just flames spreading forward through empty compartments. The destroyer was settling by the stern, bow rising slowly out of the water. The scuttling valves were doing their job. The ocean was taking the ship. pulling it down meter by meter. Tanaka regained consciousness on Naganami's bridge at 12:17 a.m. The surgeon briefed him on his condition. Concussion, possible skull fracture, needed evacuation to a hospital ship. Tanaka ignored him, asked about Teruzuki. The surgeon hesitated, pointed out the starboard side. Tanaka looked. His flagship was a floating inferno, bow in the air, stern underwater, flames climbing into the night sky, and the depth charges were still aboard, still armed, still waiting for the fire to reach them. At 4:40 a.m. on December 12th, the fire reached Teruzuki's depth charge magazines. 72 Type 95 depth charges detonated simultaneously. The explosion was visible from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, 20 mi away.